folks for the next few minutes. But hopefully you can see the screen, everybody. So hopefully you've got a view there of what we're talking about today, and in fact you've joined the right meeting, which is always important. So I'm David Lunn, one of the co-founders and principal consultants in BidWrite. So it's my pleasure to sort of walk you through today some things that we're seeing on the other side of tendering. So what's going on over in the world of procurement? For those who don't know me, my background is procurement. It's been a long time doing contracts and procurement work. It's always interesting, I guess, to understand the lay of the land through the lens of our customers from a work winning perspective, and in the context then of, well, what are we as selling organisations doing about that? So before I get started, I'd just like to, of course, acknowledge traditional owners of the lands that we're all joining our meeting from today. It's interesting to see the good diversity of people and where they're from. In Perth, it's the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also extend acknowledgement to any First Nations folks who might be on our webinar today. Okay, let me just get the ball rolling. Right, so I think it's probably an understatement to say things are changing. I don't think I can think of anything really in the context of work winning that would be unaffected in some way by what's been happening over the last few years. Now, of course, we talk pandemic and it's sort of passed. We've recognised as a result of that there have been some very seismic shifts in how buying organisations have thought about risk, what they've been doing. We're in inflation and it appears to be under control. The new federal budget was just announced yesterday, trying to address some of the cost of living challenges brought about by the inflation. Who's a bit over hearing about AI and chat GPT at the moment, right? It's all we're talking about apparently. And if you've followed for many years work winning, you'll realise, of course, that cost savings haven't disappeared out of the lexicon of buying organisations. In fact, I can take a view at the moment that it's as aggressively cost down as I've ever seen it. Perhaps it's just not talked about in that context. And there's plenty of examples actually where procurement people, especially those new to the profession, have actually never managed contractor and supplier relationships in a sort of a high inflationary environment, and the negotiations around price and cost and value. So we're in interesting and different times. But there are a few things that are particularly interesting, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. So look, I'm doing my very best, folks, joining folks as they're coming. So just bear with me if I'm just sort of momentarily distracted, letting people in. But let's move on. So what are these trends? Well, there's plenty, but I want to talk about four today in particular, and not just what they are, but well, what do you actually do about it, or what could you do about it? So these trends are. I'll just talk about these briefly. This move to more interactivity in sourcing. I think it's fair to say that we're seeing more humanity appearing in how organisations are buying than we've seen in quite some time. And I actually think that's a really good thing, to be honest, and we'll talk about that later. But there is this inexorable move to push face-to-face and people-to-people interactions in different forms into how organisations are buying. The next one is there's this rapid escalation in information share and data analytics. So procurement organisations are desperate for information, and we've got some pretty interesting examples about that, and I'll share them with you in a little while. The third is different to, but sort of similar to data analytics. It's the uptake of e-procurement, and we all know about e-procurement. It's not news, but again, what's happening there and what's driving it, I think you'll find interesting. And the fourth area that I want to talk about, admittedly briefly, is ESG, and its acceleration in terms of its influence and importance in buying organisations' decision making. And if you haven't sort of hopped on the ESG train already, then you do run the risk of being left behind. So let me just take you through each of these 4 things now. Now, just before I move us on, if you do have any questions, because it is a webinar and there's quite a few people on board, I won't be able to stop for questions. But if you do have a question, please pop it into the chat. And if you are watching the chat and you like the question, please upvote it, because we will have a little bit of time at the end, and I'll try to get through a couple of the questions that way. So if that's okay, I'll keep us moving. Right. So let's start with interactive sourcing. What do we mean? What do we mean by interactive sourcing? So it's just a bit of context, okay? And I do acknowledge, and you would have seen the reference on the first slides, that so these ideas have been captured and informed by PASA, so Procurement and Supply Australasia. And so if you're an observer of what's going on in the world of procurement, I do recommend that you go and have a look at PASA and subscribe to some of their documents, because it's very useful for us to get a sense of what's happening over in the buying side of these transactions. Anyway, here's a couple of procurement consulting organisations, Procurious and iValue, have done some research, and they've established that most procurement teams are actually being pressured to actually do things more quickly and be more nimble and adaptable, right? You could reflect on that as another way of saying that the sun rises in the east, okay? There is an enormous amount of pressure on speeding up procurements. If you're in the defence industry, for example, the strategic review that's recently announced, there's a very substantial amount of focus on the way that defence buys and trying to make it quicker. And so the paradox here is a way to make it quicker is actually to bring more human to human interaction into the process, which at first pass you might think is a little bit illogical, and it sort of isn't. And so what examples of this, and we're seeing them reasonably often now in procurements that we support, where the pitch or the presentation part of the evaluation is actually happening as part of the weighted criteria inside of the tender open period. So it's not the traditional, we do the sort of the pitch afterwards. We're actually seeing it being brought forward, and so how, as a selling organisation, are you coping with the fact that you might need to be preparing for a presentation at the same time as preparing for a physical submission, and actually having the presentation part of the scored evaluation? I know of examples in New Zealand, for example. New Zealand government will actually have a presentation as part of the procurement, and straight after the presentations will actually make an award recommendation. So it's happening pretty quickly. I'm sorry for that. So what about Agile? So everyone heard about Agile? It's an approach that's been around ICT for many years. Agile is coming into procurement, and so we're seeing Agile procurement processes. And what that means is you could be put in a room with your competitors inside of a down selecting process, and the outcome of your interactions with your competitors and your prospect will actually decide whether you proceed or you don't. So what do we do? And are we friends or we're not? Do we share information or don't we? Exceptionally interesting shifts. Competitive early contractor engagement, alliance developments. These have been around construction for some time, but they are very human to human, high-paced workshops environments that are all part of the evaluation process. And an interesting recent example we've seen in defence is this idea of co-design, where you, with your competitors, will help your client work out what they want. And as a result of that, there will be a down select and then the opportunity to participate. So the point is, and I guess let me just sort of move us to the punchline of that. This isn't really sort of on the horizon. It's really actually here. And I expect we'll see more interactivity happening either before physical, written submissions or during the process rather than after. And so what we would say is how to get on the front foot. Well, we think there's a character shift going to happen in terms of how the work-winning teams, the sorts of behaviours and the sorts of people that need to be involved. the traditional view of a deal doer will be moving away, if it's not already starting in your organisations, to people who are fundamentally more EQ, so collaboration, sharing type people, and the ability to have the decision makers sort of part of the process. Because remember, this is all trying to drive and accelerate speed. It's trying to actually drive time out of procurement. So, it's an interesting behavioural shift that we're seeing. So, I guess my question for you is knowing this, how are you skilling yourselves to be able to not just sort of have the bosses turn up to do a presentation at the end, but people involved in the procurement right the way through, interacting, building rapport, potentially having to deal with competitors in the same room? What behaviours and skills and attributes are you going to need to be successful in that environment? I'll keep us moving. I'm conscious of time, so I think I'll just say, remember, if you've got any queries or anything, just pop them in the chat, and we should get some time at the end to look at them. So the next of categories, so the four sort of main areas I was talking about. This next one around data analytics is pretty interesting, and another organisation called Markets and Markets have analysed what's going on in this market. And they'll see essentially almost a threefold increase in demand for data analytics in procurement. So the way organisations harvest and manage and understand information that relates to the goods and services that they procure. So there's this sort of hunger for information. I've got some pretty interesting examples of that in my own experience, and I know in conversations with some state governments, and let's not say who they are, that they spend a lot of money on goods and services, and there are big gaps in their understanding about how that actually articulates into community and local value, for example. They just don't really know. And so what we're also kind of recognising is this information relationship between suppliers and sellers isn't just all one-way traffic either. And a major consulting organisation called HICX has done some work and has actually noted that a stumbling block for suppliers wanting to work with procurement is the complexity of the systems that you need to interact with them. And so part of procurement's problem isn't necessarily the information that they don't have. It's just how awkward it is to get it. And what does that sort of mean, and some examples of it, and why do you care? This information will be available, so I promise you'll be able to have a version of this that you can read. But SAP did some work, and they looked at these sort of digital transformation drivers, and obviously COVID was right up there. But the circled area, if you aggregate them, are all relationships with suppliers and contractors. So improving relationships, de-risking supply strategies, enhancing visibility of supply chain, they're all exceptionally important. And so as an example, you might gain some competitive advantage by being able to furnish information to your prospect that they perhaps didn't even know that they needed, because they have this hunger for information and a desperate need to get it, and maybe you can actually help solve some problems. So what we would suggest is how to get on the front foot here is to really embrace the digitisation and information sharing. Look, it's not. I don't think it's just good enough anymore to just simply, follow whatever the KPI or the basic reporting requirements are that you might have in a contract. If you've got a way to furnish information that will help your client or customer make better decisions, you should be venturing that as part of your offer. There's certainly AI is not just the domain of our world either, the selling kind of world, the chat GPTs. There's an enormous amount of AI going into procurement in terms of how it interprets and understands and optimizes information, how its supply chains work. And from my perspective, you would do well to actually understand those shifts that are happening inside of procurement and how you might be able to support that. As an example, I talked to a small organisation not that long ago that was engaged to help a local government produce, update its website, and just the mere opportunity to share better analytics out the back of access and traffic and visits to that website that wasn't asked for by the prospect but was ventured anyway was actually one of the substantive reasons why they won. And so I don't even know that you need to be particularly insightful here at the moment. You just need to be able to share it. So the third point I want to raise is this idea of e-procurement. And again, it's not that none of us have ever heard about e-procurement before, right? It's been around for a long time. There's an organisation called KISSFlow did a bit of work and looking at something like 2/3 of procurement type organisations are planning to centralise their procurement function. So this sort of aggregation of specially transactional activity that procurement organisations undertake is just unstoppable. It's interesting. I got a very late piece of research. I just found it the other day. Actually, there's an organisation called the Hackett Group, and if you've been around procurement for a while, you'll know about Hackett. They're a very important sort of commentator and surveyor in that community. Anyway, Hackett did some work and they produced a report that was actually well subscribed by procurement officers and procurement managers in our region. That in the coming years, procurement expect to see an increase in work in the order of 11%. I think Hackett talks about 10.6, but they're only expecting staff growth in the order of about 3%. So there's this sort of 7 or 8% difference that there's an expectation that will be made up through automation and technology to drive efficiencies, right? So it's not done. Okay, so examples of what we know and love, perhaps love is a tough, a bit of a wrong term, but the idea of the platforms that already around Ariba and Abbott and like you can see those on the list there, we're going to see more and more and more of that, and we're also seeing that the technology shifting in a way that we thoroughly expect that there will be AI forming part of how your bids are evaluated. And I was talking to someone just recently where we know large-scale government procurements where they might get hundreds of tenders for a particular opportunity will be using in some sort of AI to do first-pass filtering of responses. So a bot will actually shortlist. Okay, and then actual humans will look at the shortlist and form those further value judgments. So that's the sort of the world that we're sort of moving into. So it's not just yet another uploading and portal that we have to deal with. It'll actually be, I suspect, more uploads into cells, uploads into character limited fields and the like, rather than actual documents that we're submitting, just because that's what's really driving procurement. Right. So what do you do about that? Okay. So the idea is it's in our view becomes even more essential that you step up the idea of positioning and relationship building, because these portals have this sort of homogenizing effect, as we all know, and so how do you be different then? Well, it has to be then through familiarity and intimacy of understanding and clarity of that in how you write, which only comes from upstream inside of the business development cycle. We strongly recommend people focus on persuasive writing skills, because you're shot to really hit kind of hot button issues and really target particular searchable type of language that the client's going to be using is just going to be essential. And just sidebar here a little bit, I know that there is a compelling kind of view that around, I don't think it's well informed, but it's compelling that our use of sort of GPT, ChatGPT type functionality to write tenders is alluring. The worry, of course, is it doesn't have that context and that intimacy and understanding. So you still have to actually work on the content that the AI produces. It's learning rapidly though, okay? So a few generations from now, it might well be able to get that real nuance in there, but we still certainly see that people need to be able to understand how to persuade in writing, need to understand the neuroscience behind it, because eventually human's going to actually be reading it. And we also know that procurement organisations, I don't know if you've read some articles in the Fin Review recently, where they are absolutely chucking out bids that they know are written by bots. And so this is wonderful irony that they're teaching AI to look for AI-generated content. So as fast as we've been cunning, so are they. All right. Let's not forget that at the end of the day, we have to persuade somebody to do something and persuade someone to pick us. So what that sort of means is the bidding part of your organisation was never the colouring in department, but now more so than ever, if your lens on tendering is all about just efficiency, then there really is a risk that you'll get left behind. Okay, so that's the third of the four. I'm going okay time-wise. I think my colleagues will make sure I don't sort of blow the time budget. Thanks. A question. Thank you, Dominic. And there you go. That was easy. So if you've got some questions, everybody, please just pop them in the chat, and we'll spend some time at the end talking about it. Okay, so the fourth point I wanted to share is the idea of ESG, environment, social governance. It's not a new term now, but it's newish. Has various other versions of it in the past. So corporate social responsibility, as an example. So we're seeing. I guess you'd have to have been under a rock not to realise the substantial importance that organisations and their shareholders, in particular, are placing on organisations, improving these social and governance environmental outcomes. It's not just about economic. So the concept of the triple bottom line, sure, that's still around, but there's such a strong pull now that organisations are doing the right thing. And we're seeing that 1 in 3 CPOs, the chief procurement officers, are now actually see ESG right up there in a series of priorities. In fact, I went to a conference late last year in Melbourne where this subject was talked about, and it's really interesting seeing that conundrum of cost savings and all that being balanced now with, yes, but we have to be doing the right thing. We also see that this company called Icertis there have said that more than 70% of executives who are being not just procurement people, but the actual people that run these organisations are seeing that ESG is high or business critical. Right, so it's well and truly here, and I'm in WA, so I also just pointed out that that the WA government is developing climate change legislation right now. Which will cascade into in due course how it influences buying decisions that it's making for the $80-odd billion a year of goods and services that it acquires. So it's sort of happening, right? I don't think that would be news to anybody, but what do you do about it then? And maybe you can take a view that I'll just respond to the local engagement or the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participation plans, or I'll do the bare minimum as required of me in a tendering process. Yeah, I don't think that's good enough, to be honest. And so what we're seeing, and the way I've had put to me as a really interesting framework to think about ESG, and maybe you could call it ESG rather than green, but there's sort of 3 types of views of this. There's this view of greenwashing, right? Yes, you're saying you're participating, but you're not really kind of vested or buying into it. This idea of green wishing, which is you get it, but you just don't know what to do, or green working, which is you're embracing it. It's actually part of your offer and how you're winning and executing business. There's obviously some pretty big penalties around these days for greenwashing, and you will have seen some fairly notable cases where ASIC is actually fining organisations for false ESG claims and commitments in their public reporting. So the idea of green washing has disappeared ages ago, right? So yeah, there's no place for that now. Green wishing, yes, and green working, yes. Depending on the sophistication and maturity of the organisations that you're actually trying to sell to. So here's a couple of ideas, right? So this idea, I'll just show all these for you. The idea of circularity. So again, it's not news, but there are organisations now around that will, especially in a product environment, will actually take custody of products for the whole life cycle. So it does actually work really nicely with the everything as a service view of the world that we're well and truly in. So maybe if you're a supplier of things as opposed to a supplier of services, you can think about how you can be more vested in the life cycle entirety of the product that you're selling. And there's some interesting examples. I think IKEA is an example, office furniture suppliers as well, where they will essentially look after them forever. And there'll never be an environmental burden as a result of the supply that they're making. Everybody's talking about emissions reductions and carbon neutrality, and there are different organisations have different aspirations and different targets, but they are all worrying about scope 3 emissions reductions, and they're the emissions that their supply chain makes, not the ones that they're making or the ones that are made as a result of the consumption of their goods and services. That's scope 1 and 2. Scope 3. So you have an unbelievable opportunity to help your prospects get on top of understanding what the scale of the scope 3 emission issue is and how ways to actually overcome that. I still say, though, that local and also social, societal sort of initiatives will keep being important, especially assistance and positive promotion for people with disability, other disadvantaged groups, Aboriginals, Torres Strait Islander people, local initiatives and the like will still all be there. So you have to be thinking about this in the context of your work winning, even if the invitation document you're responding to might still look a little bit slim in relation to what they want you to actually explain to them. So that's the sort of the sort of the four main blocks really. I've just got a couple of slides to go, and I'm denied about whether this idea of disruption was a fifth trend or whether it's just essentially a state that we now experience, and I think that's probably correct. We don't. As I said at the start of the webinar, we all know that disruption is just part and parcel of life now, and it really is just normal. I don't think that there's this revision to normal as a concept anymore. It's what it used to be is instructive, but not probably that relevant to what we should be doing. We know, there's examples there of all those sorts of disruptors that we've seen. It's really interesting going, all right, well, that's our new normal. What do we do about it? There's this, Bain actually did some work, and Bain & Co, and they talk about these three sort of pillars to be able to thrive in disruption, or is the language that they use. The first of these was prediction and adaptability. So you've got this sort of analytical ability to try to see what's coming, which is prediction. This concept of adaptability, flexibility, which I think we're all embracing. But this one around resilience is actually really interesting because how do you be resilient? And there's examples around, I guess, cash and business type resilience, but it's also people resilience. And I think our sort of way of actually thinking about work winning now, we just roll with it, right? You can't do anything but. So I kind of like it, right? It sets the context of behaviour and attitude and ethos that I think underpins all of those other things that I've talked about. But the other thing, perhaps more importantly, is how are you helping your client be more resilient? So think about resilience through a work winning lens. What is it that you can do to help them be more resilient? there might be, and there are examples around working capital. Perhaps you'll take some of that more on board. We know that the Fortune 500 companies during COVID, something like added $1 trillion worth of value to working capital. So the solution to supply shortfalls was just to bring inventory back, right? But that has a massive cost burden, and we're watching that go away. But that's an example, I guess, of how the supply chain might be able to support resilience. But I think there are plenty of other things that you could be thinking about if you turned your mind to it. I guess one last observation I'll make, and this is 100% associated with me, so take it with a grain of salt if you like. But we reflect a lot on what happens at the moment in work winning and what procurement organisations are up to, and how do we help our clients be more successful. And I'd have to say at the moment, in the last 6 months or so, some of the decisions that we're seeing procurement organisations, buying organisations take cause us all to scratch our heads a bit. And the organisations that you thought would win don't. The ones that you didn't think would win do. Procurements are abandoned when you thought they wouldn't have been. Things are being put on hold and reviewed. There's all this sort of character to our work winning landscape. So my view on all of that, I guess my simple view is you can't hold back anymore. Right? If you've got a good idea, it has to be ventured. If you think your prospect's not doing the right thing or there's a better way, even if they haven't asked you, just tell them. If you're in those interactive environments and you're worrying about your IP being disclosed to your competitors or whatever, I say just go for it, because my sense is that in all of this uncertainty that I've been talking to you about, procurement organisations are looking for some certainty. They are looking for some signals and some views. Buying organisations are under extreme pressure. They don't have enough people. There's a lot of immaturity around how procurement teams work. There's a lot of upstream pressure to perform. It's ripe for sharing of good ideas and having that being valued, especially if you consider the more humanity that's kind of coming into the process. And so my advice is don't hold back. I really don't. Okay, I've just got a slide to finish. This is the last one, I promise, and then we'll grab a couple of the questions at the end. But we love this slide. We love the trust triangle. It was framed in its elegant form a few years ago now. A couple of Harvard Business School professors, Fry and Morris, produced this really wonderful articulation of what it is that we're trying to achieve through the concept of trust building. And you can absolutely apply that to propensity to win or likelihood to be successful. And I just wanted to finish on that, because through all the hustle and bustle, the chat GPTs and all this sort of stuff, let's not forget that it's humans ultimately making decisions about humans, and it's mostly services. It's 85% of our economy, and they're fundamentally motivated to pick you because they trust you or your organisation or your offer more than any other one. And these elements of being empathic to their needs and issues is as important as it's ever been to the creation of trust. And you can't just blow that away in the context of efficiency and hope to be successful. Your logic or what you do or how you do it, or your approach, your methodology, people, solutions, technology and the like is interesting, needs to make sense, but it is rarely a reason that you're different. And so those people who sort of invest a huge amount of energy in tendering, work winning generally around what you do, are missing where the focus would really go, which is probably to empathy and also the concept of authenticity, why they can believe you, why you should be trusted, your proof points and evidence, the comfort that your offer brings to the organisation that's evaluating it. So despite everything I've talked about, and you remember those 4 points, just to sort of draw a bow on this session. So you know, we really need to worry about ESG, right? We need, it's not green sort of washing had disappeared ages ago. Data analytics is massively important. We can't forget the information hunger. E-procurement, we're going to see more and more of it. But paradoxically, we're also going to see more interactivity and earlier in procurements. And so the sorts of skills and behaviours that your folks, your teams need to be more successful, I think is shifting. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. There's me. We've got a couple of questions now, so let me just so Dominic, thank you. 2 questions. So this is the opportunity, folks. We've got sort of 5 minutes or so left just to think if you've got any other questions. So Dominic, your first question was, will procurement organisations forbid AI content in submissions? It's a really good question. I don't think the answer is they'll forbid it outright, because we've seen examples for right now where an organisation, say a selling organisation, will use AI to help farm internal information to then gather it to put it in a submission. So there's a fine line, I think, between AI to inform what you produce as in terms of its content, as then in terms of its presentation. So I don't think at this stage we'll see an absolute outright forbidding of it, because but they are exceptionally suspicious at the moment of content that will be obviously AI generated. The other thing I'll also just point on this point, because I know we're all thinking and talking about it, is there's a very interesting kind of issue about using a 100% open platform to prompt questions to get responses. So if you're not using your own information, but you're asking the universe for inspiration, what you're also doing through your questioning and the way you're approaching is that you're actually teaching all your competitors the same thing, right? So it's actually in a way a way to drive some short-term efficiencies, perhaps, but it doesn't necessarily drive competitive advantage. And so I think the point is that we're all still trying to figure it out, to be honest. And so my advice, as I mentioned earlier, Dominic, is just keep an eye on what the buying organisations are up to, right? Because they'll be disclosing it. We'll see conditions of tender before long, I think, that we'll certainly talk about AI. It won't be long before you'll have an AI policy that will become a requested item in your tender, I think. All right, so that's we're already seeing organisations doing that. So yeah, it's an interesting space. Another question from Dominic is, if everyone says we do ESG, how do you stand out? Yeah, we've all hopped on, right? We're all in, Dominic. Why are we different? And I think my advice there is to look back at the trust triangle as your guide for that, because being empathic about ESG isn't just saying we do ESG, it's showing which elements of it relate to that client's opportunities and needs and issues. So, and I think the standout actually is the practice of it. And so the authenticity, the believability, because that actually moves you from the concept of green wishing, which is, we love the idea of, we all think it's great, to we're actually already practicing it. And so I do think that where you'll gain advantage will be through authenticity, through proving it. An example, if you're in a business that's massively dependent on hydrocarbons right now to do what you do, are you exploring offsets? I know there's debates about how great offset schemes are and how reliable they are, how trustable they are, but maybe you could be offering an offset already and as a pricing option, and maybe you've commissioned a bit of research to look at exactly how much you actually know how much carbon you're emitting. That's pretty interesting, because a lot of organisations can't even tell their customers that, and that's one of the fundamentals around Scope 3 performance. So I think there's things that can be done. All right, mood and appetite is what holds it back in my view, but it's not time to be not doing it. Dominic, you've got a third question, right? So this is how it's done, right, folks? I know it's not scary. AI can help bidders prepare video presentations. Yeah, AI is popping up everywhere. In fact, I suspect what we'll see is informing most parts of the work winning process in some shape or form. There's no question, and yeah, we're all sort of a bit over it, but none of us should be putting our heads in the sand about it. Now, is it going to trickle down through all of the supply chains? Absolutely. It won't be long before most buying organisations will have some AI involved in how they're procuring, and there'll be and most organisations, to maintain competitive advantage, will need to be enabling technology to drive not just efficiency gains, which is where it principally is pointing at the moment, but actually allowing better quality decision making, more rapid decision making as well. Look, folks, that's kind of it. So just in case everyone, we will actually be sending an email tomorrow. I think, right, Louise, will be tomorrow morning, which will have opportunity to link to the deck, and thank you very much once again, folks, for participating. I really do appreciate it. It's exciting. All right, it's exciting times. It's a bit terrifying as well, but if you've taken nothing away from my session today, let me just stop sharing. It's hop on board, right? Don't assume your work winning environment static, because it absolutely isn't. There is a bunch of information around. Take the time to go and have a look, and make sure you stay a step in front of your competitors. Okay, I think that'll do. Thanks very much. Thanks again. Feel free to reach out if you want to. Otherwise, stay tuned to your emails tomorrow for follow-up content from us. So, thanks very much.